Away you go, Dr. Deha.
Okay, thank you very much,
Yes,
Martin. Okay, should I just start now?
just start now. I'll be your audience for the moment. Okay.
Okay, right. So, good morning from the UK. Um, and today, the content we are covering is a very important one, basically because in my experience with students, this is one issue that has come up repeatedly, and we thought it would be a good idea to sort of talk about it, which is the role of theoretical and conceptual frameworks in research. A lot of the times, there is some misconception about how these are used. Um, and one thing that students sometimes do is they would add the theoretical or the conceptual framework without understanding the integral part that these elements play within the design of the research. So these are critical components of a research design, not just because they are guiding your research or sort of situating it in established theory, but they have a very important part to play in how you collect data and how you analyze data. So that's probably the most important element. Probably the most important contribution that theoretical frameworks and conceptual frameworks do for any research study. So that's what we're looking at today. And I have a few activities as well that I would like to engage the participants in, but we'll come to that gradually. So let's start this. So first of all, why do frameworks even matter? Why should we even bother with these frameworks? So you see, any research study, while on the one hand, it is true that it is driven by the interest of the researcher. And it is also true that there would be some part of the research topic or some part of the research problem that the researchers has a personal interest in. It has to be grounded and guided in theoretical reasoning, right? Um, Going back before I move on, I'm just going to go back and give you a small example. I was speaking to a colleague of mine a few days back, and he's doing his DBA now. So I just asked him what his topic of DBA was, because we're always looking for sort of common areas where we can collaborate for research papers and that sort of stuff. And he told me that it was on athletic apparel or something like that. And he's a very athletic person, runs marathons and that sort of stuff. And as he was writing his topic in the WhatsApp chat, I had this sort of realization that whatever research we are doing is somehow linked to the person we are, the personalities we have, and that sort of stuff. And I said that to him. I said, every time I read a research topic, it gives me some sort of an insight into the researcher's personality as well. And he said yes, and then we should consider how unbiased research can be, because there is an inherent bias in any research we do, and how that sort of shapes the outcomes of a study. So, having said that, yes, you would have certain preferences for the kind of research that you want to do, the kind of topics that you want to sort of focus on. So, for example, I'm a gender researcher. But I also do a lot of research in leadership and management. So, I'm always trying to find common grounds between leadership and management and gender. And an example is that the most recent research paper that I've written is on inclusive leadership, AI assisted models, multicultural teams, and gender. So that's combining four elements. Now, because most research is like that, not having a guiding theoretical framework is going to be could be disastrous for the study, basically because it could go in any direction, and that theoretical framework is just basically your sat nav, your GPS for the outcomes of the study. So we're going to look at two of these elements. And I've also, the other thing is also because a lot of people use these interchangeably. Students might think that the theoretical framework is the same as the conceptual framework and vice versa, but they're not. They're two very different things, and we're going to talk about that today as well. So why do frameworks matter? First of all, they provide structure to your research. Somebody had come up with a theory that is an established theory that has been accepted in academia and the wider research community. And by identifying an appropriate theory and then using it for your study provides that structure for your research. Just like I told you the example of the research paper that I have done. If I didn't have a guiding theory, it would be very difficult for me to sort of stay focused on the topic and keep it on track when I was trying to gather data. Then you also need to remember that your research needs to link to the existing knowledge in some way. It should either enhance existing knowledge or it should contribute to the development of some new knowledge. You can't do that if you don't have theoretical foundations to situate your research in, right? So linking research to existing knowledge is also, something that frameworks help to do, either a theoretical framework or a conceptual framework or both. So for more advanced studies like the PhD or even the MRes programs, you would be expected to have both a theoretical framework and a conceptual framework. And that links your research to existing knowledge. Then, as I had said earlier, it guides research questions and hypotheses. So that is your data collection and your data analysis. So just give me 1 second. My apologies. I've come up with a very bad flu over the weekend, and so I have to do it with that. Anyways, so how does your data collection and even your data analysis it is guided by research questions by your theoretical frameworks is, let's say your research is about the impact of any style of leadership, transformational leadership, on employee satisfaction. When you are doing your data collection, you're going to have to develop questions either for a survey questionnaire or for your interview that would sort of be driven or derived from the leadership theory itself, transformational leadership theory. And that, of course, comes from your review of literature and how well you understand these two elements and the connectivity between them. So you will, let's say, transformational leadership theory has 4 elements: idealized influence and intellectual stimulation and that sort of stuff. So when you are asking research questions whether in a questionnaire or in an interview, you would be using those elements of or those tenets of transformational leadership theory to gather data. So for example, you might want to ask, okay, how does your leader influence you? How do you idealize this person? Why do you idealize this person? What is it about his leadership style or personality or communication style that sort of influences your behavior? So that's a very small example of how one tenet of the transformational leadership theory could sort of guide the development of research questions, data collection questions. And ultimately, when you have that data with you, you would also then need to analyze the data using the same theory. And then you would have, okay, these are my findings. These are consistent with the theory we used. These are my findings. that were not explained in the theory that we used, and therefore that this is my unique or novel contribution to the knowledge base. So that's how you use your theoretical framework to guide your research questions and your hypothesis. This is the one area in my experience where students make the most mistake when using theoretical and conceptual frameworks. They would have a very nice theoretical framework. It looks tidy, it fits in nicely, and it has been, derived from the literature review, and then they drop it. They do the literature review, they have identified their literature gap, they have a theoretical framework, they have a conceptual framework, but then when they're developing their research questions, it is not reflected in those questions at all. The data collection questions, that it is not reflected in those questions at all. And that is such a wasteful exercise, particularly when the theoretical framework is really, really interesting and it has been developed with a very strong link to the research gap, because that's another element as well. You have done the literature review, you have identified a research gap, and then you develop a theoretical framework and or a conceptual framework. And you're saying that this is how these two frameworks are going to help me address my research gap. But if you have not incorporated them in your data collection process, they're not helping you address your research gap, because you don't have the sort of theoretical and conceptual understanding to gather data from those perspectives and then analyze data from those perspectives as well. So that's your guiding research questions and hypothesis, and also helping interpret findings. That's where you use your conceptual and theoretical frameworks to establish your data analysis. And then, of course, it improves research rigor and credibility. This is really important because, you could have, if you sat down and started writing, you could probably come up with a research paper every month. But is there enough content in there? Is there enough thought gone into it? Is there enough sort of reflexivity in it that you are bringing a particular contribution to the study? And is there sort of enough linkage between existing knowledge and theory and your contribution to the area of study or the subject area that helps improve research rigor and it makes it more credible, right? So that's really, really important. And sometimes I joke about this with students. I say, I really like all of you, especially for example, if they're doing undergraduate research or MBA research. And I say that, they say, well, these are our recommendations. This is my contribution. And at an undergraduate level, when they're doing their, short dissertations, I would say, yes, I like you all very much. But your opinion without having a theoretical foundation doesn't matter. So that's really important because it helps improve your research rigor and credibility, and that basically establishes your reputation as a researcher. So let's look at theoretical framework first. So theoretical frameworks are always based on existing theories. Now, this is, let's say, the theory of group development. Tuckman, proposed this theory in 1965, and it is what it is. So it is based on existing theories, and you don't really have the space to make any changes within, because these are established theories and they have been established for decades. It does provide a theoretical lens for the study. So these theories, like I have explained previously, these theories become the perspective that is going to combine with your perspective and then guide the study. So it's not, completely untethered, so to speak. They provide these theoretical frameworks provide the theoretical lens, which means that you're going to use these theoretical frameworks to see how you're going to address your research gap, see how you're going to do your data collection, and ultimately analyze your data as well. Theories, because they're established, they would have, they would explain some relationships between the variables. So, for example, taking the example of transformational leadership, why do you think we have come up with so many theories on leadership? Because we are interested in the impact of different leadership styles on employees. how it impacts employees, how they behave under different leaders, which one's a better one, so to speak, in which environment is a certain leadership style better than the others. All of that knowledge base has developed because we were interested in studying these relationships between these different variables: leadership style and performance, leadership style and engagement, leadership style and satisfaction. So the theoretical framework explains the relationships between variables, and now you would understand why it is so important to choose the appropriate theoretical framework. Because a wrong theoretical framework, you don't have you can't really explain the relationship between variables if your theory is off. So based on what your research questions are or what your research is trying to do, you have to choose an appropriate theory that will help you understand the relationships between these different variables. It also supports hypothesis development, and it anchors your research in scholarly literature. So established, peer-reviewed literature is your research has to be linked to that, both for its own credibility and for ultimately contributing to that same body of knowledge as well. So that's your theoretical framework. And your conceptual framework is your proposed model. You have got, particularly if you're doing a PhD or a DBA, you spend a significant amount of time in just doing the literature review. I have a DBA student, he's been doing a literature review for 3 months now, right? If you're spending such an amount of time in developing sort of a repository of all the literature that has been written on the subject, you would be thinking about it. And again, this is where that earlier point of bias that I was talking about, I wouldn't say it's bias, but it's reflexivity. Reflexivity is extremely important. That's what you are bringing to a research study based on your history, your interest, your perspective. So when you have engaged in literature review for a significant amount of time in your research journey, you would come up with some connections that make sense to you because you have sort of you know um, internalize them differently. Your reflexivity is helping you establish those relationships between those different two or three different things. So, for example, again, staying with that example of transformational leadership, let's say you are studying the impact of transformational leadership on performance, right? At the same time, you might say, well, you know what? There are other organizational theories at play over here. So, what about organizational culture? What about group development theory? I think there is some sort of a relationship. And if we only look at transformational leadership and the impact on employee engagement or employee performance, it would be a straightforward thing. But there are other things that play over here. And what are those things? That's your concept. That's your conceptualization of all the research that you have read in your as part of your literature review, and you come up with a proposed model, which we call the conceptual framework. So this is the key difference between a theoretical framework and a conceptual framework. A theoretical framework is some sort of framework that has been established. It is being used as theory. And the conceptual framework is your conceptualization of the different, theories that you read as part of your literature review, and then you come up with some sort of a model that you think works best. And this shows the relationships between variables. This is impacted by the independent variable is going to impact the dependent variable, and then we're going to have mediators and moderators in there. It is again derived from the literature review. So you're not pulling it out of thin air. It is derived from the literature review, but it's your conceptualization and your understanding of the literature review, and how you think the different things that you have sort of, teased out of your literature review, how do these different things sort of connect to each other? It is often presented as a diagram. Because remember, if you look at most theories, they have infographics, right? So it's useful to have your conceptual framework sort of produced as an infographic as well, because that is going to sort of streamline your thought process for somebody who's reading that. and they don't have to jump through hoops trying to understand what connections you're trying to make over here. So it is often presented as a diagram, and it is used to guide empirical analysis, which is again your data collection and data analysis part. So right now, I would like to take a few minutes, and I'm going to um, ask you to think about these things, everything that we have discussed so far. And I'm going to give you a couple of questions, and I would like you to answer in the chat box if possible, please. So, uh, first is when you look at your own research, what do you think is the difference between your theoretical and your conceptual frameworks? More importantly, do you think a research can exist without either a theoretical or conceptual framework, but more importantly, a theoretical framework? Do you think a research can exist without a theoretical framework? And why do you think journals emphasize theoretical contributions? I know when you're trying to sort of publish, it gets irritating sometimes when you get back your paper and you say, well, needs to have more theoretical sort of grounding and that sort of stuff. But why do you think journals do that? And anybody who's doing research, this is really important because you don't want your research to be just, sitting gathering dust. You ultimately, every researcher's aim is to get published at the end. So why don't you think about these questions? What's the difference between in your particular case, if you're doing a research, what's the difference between your theoretical and conceptual models? Can research exist without a theoretical framework and or conceptual framework? And why do journals emphasize theoretical contributions? So I'm just going to take maybe 5 minutes, and then if you could post your answers in the chat, that would be great, please. Thank you. I've just shared the questions in the chat box. And remember, there are no right or wrong answers. This is just a discussion. We still have one more minute. If anybody wants to answer the questions, that would be great. I'm really interested in the third question, second and third questions, basically. I think that's a very important point that Gopakumar has raised. The theoretical framework helps us to derive the conceptual framework, and the conceptual framework is more specific to our research. Any ideas on question number two? Can research exist without a theoretical framework? This is sort of a trick question as well. Do you think research can, after everything I've said about the importance of theoretical and conceptual frameworks, do you think research can exist without a theoretical framework? Okay, so in very rare cases, research can exist without a theoretical framework, but it's strongly discouraged in business and management, and particularly social studies and business studies. It's very strongly discouraged. If you are writing a thesis or if you're writing journal papers, research articles, it is expected that you would have a theoretical framework that would be guiding your study. So most research would be using um, a theoretical framework. But in very rare cases, if you're doing a research on a very novel concept, which is, very exploratory research, then you might not have a theoretical framework to guide the study of, or a formal theoretical framework to guide the study. Even in those cases, your research would be guided by some sort of a conceptualization of the theories that you've read about or the literature that you've read about. In such cases, you would be identifying patterns, you'd be trying to generate insights from the study and would help develop the future studies. So you are contributing to the development of studies. And one of the most significant examples of this in recent times is the research on AI, because we didn't know how to sort of go about doing that. There was very limited, um, literature available on the impact of the new AI tools that we are using on the different things like communication, like employee satisfaction, employee engagement, group cohesion. All of these things are rather new. So anybody doing research in AI would be sort of, it would be uncharted territory for them. And they might, not would, but they might need to go in blind without a strong conceptual or theoretical framework. But that is still, even in those cases, it would still be it would still have some sort of pattern recognition and pattern application from the research literature review. So thank you very much for your engagement with that. But basically theory explains the why. Why is something happening? Why is something worth studying? Why is there going to be, a relationship between these two things? Your conceptual framework explains the how. How is that going to sort of look like? What could be expected in terms of the outcomes and that sort of stuff. And I'll give you an example. I was watching a podcast yesterday about somebody who used to work in the government in Pakistan, and he said once there was some entourage going of a few years back of a prime minister, and they had been sort of, because the police had cordoned off the area, they were stuck in the traffic jam for hours. And he said, I got frustrated after some time. So I just put my hand on my car horn and I started beeping. And he said, as I was doing it, everybody else started doing it as well because they were frustrated being stuck over there also. So he said, when everybody was doing it, so there's, tens of hundreds of cars stuck in the traffic jam for a couple of hours now. When everybody started doing it, sort of the police was sort of forced to open the route, and they could drive. And he said, when we started driving, I looked, towards my wife, and I said to her, "This is how you protest." And he said, she smiled and she said, "Yes, but that the entourage, the person in the entourage, I don't know who it was, some minister or whatever, he might just simply think that you are sort of rooting for him. You are trying to appreciate him. That's your way of doing it. And that's basically your conceptual framework. So how you look at certain things, how you conceptualize the literature that you have read, the theories that you have read, and how you conceptualize the relationship between them. So the theory explains the why, but the conceptual framework is going to explain the how. So this is so theoretical framework is based on established theories, and conceptual is developed by the researcher. Theoretical explains the why of the relationships, why they exist, and conceptual explains how these different variables will relate. What is the independent variable? What is the dependent variable? What is the mediating variable that is going to influence the relationship between these two things? What is the moderating variable that is going to determine the strength and the direction of this relationship? So all of that is your conceptual framework, and they both guide the research design. So how do they connect? Theory informs the literature review. Then literature helps to identify the variable. The conceptual framework models the relationships between these variables. The hypotheses are then derived from the conceptual framework or conceptual model. And then the empirical testing, you going out, taking that conceptual framework and going out and, collecting data and then analyzing it, that validates those relationships. It sort of, your research is going to prove this was my conceptualization of these different variables. Based on the data I collected and based on how I analyzed it using this theoretical framework and situating it in this conceptual framework, these are my findings. They confirm what I thought was correct or true about the relationship between these variables, or it completely negates what I thought was true. And these are the interesting things that I have found from it. So anybody who does research would sort of understand how personally invested in any research we become. And again, this is why researcher bias and keeping it in check. Reflexivity is important. Bias needs to be kept in check, and it would always be there. But I think if you can recognize it and make sure that it doesn't impact the way your empirical testing is validating these relationships, that's really important. So how do you develop a theoretical framework? You identify your research problem. Then, of course, you conduct the literature review. Identify the relevant theories, and then select the most appropriate theory and link these theories to the study variables. So, how do you think your chosen theory is suitable or appropriate enough to study the variables that you have identified as being key to answering your research questions? So, this is where that whole sort of thing starts coming together. Now, when you are studying theories, this is something that we discuss, and it is something that is encouraged by some researchers. I was having a conversation with a colleague who's a respected researcher, and he said you should. So, for example, I'm a gender researcher, and I use agency theory a lot in agency theory in feminism a lot in my studies. And agency theory is all about having agency, power, control of decision making. So he said you should focus on agency theory, and that should be your pet theory, and you should become extremely, extremely good at just that one theory. And even if other agency theories, so for example, intersectionality theory or feminism, you don't really need to know everything about it, but you might want to know everything or all the iterations, all the possibilities, all the different variants of the agency theory. So there is this mindset as well, that maybe every researcher would have their own theory that they think is most relevant to the kind of research topics or research questions that they're wanting to ask, and they would be using those theories predominantly. But when you're doing a literature review, and again, going back to that thing, I'm very committed to agency theory, because that's the kind of approach that I have to things. Like, if you have agency, you have power, you have or control over decision making, and that impacts outcomes. However, when you're doing a literature review, there needs to be this sort of separation between what you think is your preferred theory, and what theory is coming out of the literature review, and why it is the most appropriate one to address your research gap. Again, one mistake that I see students making a lot is they would do a literature review, and then they would bring in a theory that they think is most suitable, but it has no connection to the literature review. And that's that's a huge red flag in research. If you have done a certain type of literature review and you have developed a theory that is completely divorced from it, where did that come from? Um, and that's where, again, there is this element of researcher bias. So identify your research problem, which is going to sort of guide your literature review. We identify the problem, we select the keywords from it, and then we go and do a literature review for that. Based on that literature review, we look at some theories, what have previous researchers used, what other theories are in there, in that sort of subject area, and how do they relate to the kind of research questions I'm asking, and the kind of research gap that I have identified and I want to address. Then you select the most appropriate theory, and you link the theory to study variables, basically stating, this is the theory I'm using. This is how I'm going to use it to answer my research questions or literature gap. And then we have building the conceptual framework. So you identify your key variables. Then you review the relationships in literature. What does literature say about these variables, or the relationship of these variables? What impacts what? What has been the independent variable in previous studies? What has been typically the dependent variable? Are there any mediating or moderating variables? And what is your conceptualization of all of that mix? So this is why, as I said earlier, a student of mine has been doing the literature review for 3 months now. This is why it's going to take time, because you will read something, you will step away from it, you'll make your own notes about it, you'll come back to it. You will read something on that new idea that you have developed. You will again read something on that, step away from it, make up your own mind about it, come back to it. So it's a very, a very iterative cycle, doing this literature review and coming up with a conceptual framework. You hardly ever do it in a couple of sittings. You need, and so stepping away is really important, because then there's a gap between you and all the content, and you can think about it in a sort of an independent way. And that's where research and reflexivity comes in and is really important as well. So once you have reviewed these relationships in literature, you developed your proposed relationships, you develop your conceptual framework. This is what I have read, this is what I think they can sort of look like in my conceptual framework, and then you create a diagram for it, infographic for it, because a lot of the times when students don't develop the infographic and just write it down, for somebody reading it, it's just a lot of words that they have already read in literature, and they can't, it's very difficult to visualize how they all link together in a conceptual framework. So a conceptual framework would typically have a diagram or an infographic. And based on that you develop your research hypothesis. So I'm going to show you this table now, which sort of brings all of these things together. So you have the element, the meaning, purpose, and example. So theory is an established set of principles explaining relationships between phenomena. The purpose of the theory is explain why something happens. And an example is the social exchange theory. A theoretical framework is the application of a theory to a specific research problem. So, for example, it provides the theoretical foundation for the study. And the example could be you're using social exchange theory to explain the relationship between leadership and employee performance. The conceptual framework is a model showing relationships between the study variables. And the purpose of the conceptual framework is to show how variables are related in the study. So, for example, what is the relationship between the leadership and job? What is the relationship between satisfaction and performance? And are there other things that might impact these relationships? And your research model in such a study could look like this: the final diagram that is used for empirical testing, and it's a visual representation used for hypothesis testing, the hypothesis that you have developed using theoretical framework, and conceptual framework. And an example could be a statistical model tested using regression or SEM. So I'm going to leave this here for a second for you to read yourself, and then I want to ask you a question. Okay, my question to all participants is, think about your own research topic. What do you think is your dependent variable? What variables might influence it? So what would be the independent variable? Are there any mediating or moderating variables in your own study or in your own research topic? And what theory could possibly explain the relationship? You don't have to get it perfect, but you should be able to think about it and talk about these things. So what is your dependent? I'm going to post these questions in the chat box as well. What is your dependent variable? What variables might influence it? And what theory could explain the relationship? So think about these questions from the point of view of your own research topic, please. And I'll give you about 5 minutes to do that. We still have a couple of minutes to go, so I really appreciate some responses on this. Thank you. Thank you, Gopakumar. When you wrote the TOE framework, I thought my mind went to the theory of everything. But thank you. I had to sort of check myself there. Okay, let's go back to this then. So, some common mistakes. Confusing theory with variables, they're two different things. The variables might be situated in the theory. The variables in your conceptual framework might be derived from different theories, and therefore they might not sort of belong to a theory. But sometimes students try to sort of justify the choice of theoretical frameworks by citing their variables, and there might be a sort of a misalignment over there. The second thing is your theoretical framework and your conceptual framework should have very clear theoretical grounding in your research. Just because I think I mentioned this earlier, just because you think a particular theory is suitable, or just because you like a particular theory, or because it serves the overall research orientation of your own research direction, doesn't mean that you choose it. So every theory that you choose needs to have a very strong link to your research questions, your the aim and objectives of your study, and of course your research gap. You can't write a research gap and you identify a theory or a theoretical framework which has no link to that. So this needs to have a very clear theoretical justification and grounding in the purpose of your study. Then using too many unrelated theories, this happens as well. Again, the students might choose 4, 5 theories, and 2 or 3 of them are gelling well together, and then the other 2 are just looking like window dressing. So um, it's I don't want to say this because this is linked to the last question that I have to ask you in a couple of slides. but don't use too many unrelated theories, basically. Then the framework is not linked to the literature. Again, any framework that you identify has to be derived from the literature review. If the literature review is talking about something else, and then the framework you have developed is clearly not logically derived from the literature review, that's a weakness in the study. And if you have unclear variable definitions, if you don't know which variables you're choosing and why, and how these variables are going to help you answer your research questions or address your research gap, that is a red flag in research as well. And that sort of, you probably, if you're not clear in that, you probably wouldn't be able to defend it in the viva. So remember, in strong dissertations, theoretical framework is the borrowed lens. You have borrowed the theories from established theoretical models. Conceptual framework is your structured integration of the literature, of the variables in the literature, of the variables in the theoretical framework. And your contribution is that you have used these frameworks to guide your data collection and your data analysis, and then you are analyzing your own findings from the point of view of these frameworks, and you suggest, okay, my findings are confirmed by a theoretical framework, or there's something new over here which has not been discussed earlier, and that is my contribution to the field of study. Now, these are some diagnostic questions to ask when you're choosing your theoretical framework. Why this theory and not others? What makes this more suitable for my study than all the other theories that I have discussed or read about? How does it help shape your research design? Okay, what kind of research questions you're going to ask? Sorry. What kind of research questions you're going to ask? How you're going to ask them? Is it going to be a structured survey? Is it going to be interviews? If it's interviews, what kind of interviews you're doing? So your research design is basically very much determined by the choice of your theoretical frameworks. What is it that you're trying to find out, and what's the best way of finding that out? Then again, how is it going to shape your data interpretation when you have collected all the data? How are you going to use these theoretical and conceptual frameworks to shape the interpretation of that data? Is it going to be linked in your findings and discussion? This is a really important part that sometimes students miss. And the theoretical framework is nice, looks pretty at the end of your literature review, but then you do that and you do the data collection and the data analysis. But when it comes to the findings and discussion part, it's lost. So how is it referenced in findings and discussion? Are you discussing the findings of your study and linking it back to the theoretical framework that you identified, linking it back to the conceptual framework that you had developed? And is it over described but underused? So it looks really nice. You have explained it. You have found all the connections between the different variables and the different theories and your research gap and your research questions, but then you have not used it. So that's really, really important. Now, when we say why this theory and not others, this is where my last question comes in. And that is, how many theories should researchers use? One or multiple for your research? And that's just a single question that I want to ask. And I'm going to copy and paste that in the chat box as well. And I would like the answer to this, please. should you be using one theory or multiple theories in a study? Kumar, the depends is such a universal thing. Everything depends, yes. But multiple theory is better. Okay, then my next question to you is how many? How many multiple theories? Okay, it depends on how many variables. Then I would say how many variables would be too many variables to want to study in a single research study. It does, yes. I'm just going to give 1 more minute for somebody else if they want to add, and then I'm going to go through this a bit as well. Okay, so um, having one strong theory is a good idea if your study is simple and there is a clarity of this relationship between the central theory and your research topic. So the advantages of having one theory is or one central theory is that you have a clear theoretical foundation that you can sort of explain to your audience. There is a simple explanation of relationships as well, so you're not trying to sort of try and figure out how one thing leads to the other, and then there's something else coming in as mediating or moderating variable. The hypothesis development is obviously easier, but I think the strongest point is that it has a strong conceptual coherence. It's easy to understand. It's easy to collect data on the basis of one strong central theory and then analyze it as well. And then, of course, report this relationship back through your discussion. However, using two theories is very common as well. So It helps you explain different aspects of the phenomenon. And so using two theories in business and management research is again very common. And up to three theories is also acceptable, particularly when you are trying to look at a research problem that is a little bit more complex. And then it has, like Gopakumar, like you said, it has these different variables, and each theory is going to explain these different variables. But the key issue here is that these should be very strongly and logically integrated. So, for example, Gopakumar, if I take your researched, the answer that you gave for the previous one is technology adoption, let's say, right, in organizations, or AI adoption in organizations. So, the possible theories that could feed this kind of a research study would be, of course, be the technology adoption model, because you're talking about technology adoption or AI adoption, which is technology. Um, the other one could be the technology organization environment framework and the diffusion of innovation theory. Now, all of these theories are sort of, going around, or that same issue of technology adoption, and explain different elements. So the TAM model is going to explain one element, the perceived ease of use, or usefulness, and that sort of stuff. Whereas the diffusion of innovation theory is going to explain how it's going to sort of be mass adopted. And you could use two or three different theories because they're explaining different aspects of the same problem. Once it goes over three theories, it generally becomes too much. We call this theoretical fragmentation, right? Too many theories means that the conceptual clarity is very weak. If I need four or five theories to explain my problem, maybe my problem needs better definition. The research framework becomes very confusing, again, because not just the research framework, but the research design becomes very confusing as well. Because remember, your theoretical frameworks, or the theories that you're using in your theoretical framework, is guiding your research, your data collection, and your data analysis. How many different questions do you think you could possibly ask your research participants, either through a structured survey questionnaire or through interviews, to satisfy the demands of including all of those theories? It's going, and then again, just think from the point of view of your research participant. Their mind would be fragmented and scattered as well, because they're trying to sort of think about all of these different things that you have asked in order to satisfy the use of multiple theories. So it's very confusing, not just for the person who is reading your study at the end, uh, but also for the people who are providing you the data that you're going to use. There's usually very weak theoretical justification for a theoretical framework that has more than three theories. Sorry, it's very difficult. You might find theories that you think are suitable, but doesn't mean that you have to. The most I have seen in my experience has been a student had added six theories, and it was chaos basically. And you would have un, unless you are really really experienced in that area, and as a student you aren't, you would have a lot of difficulty explaining the relationships between these multiple theories. So it's quality over quantity always when it comes to a theoretical framework or the number of theories. One, it's ideal for clear studies. Just because your study has one theory doesn't make it less sophisticated, as long as that one theory is aligned with your research aim and objectives and is helping you answer your research questions. I always tell my students, when we are developing the proposal and the research aim and objectives, particularly in questions, that the worst thing you can do is ask a question or identify a theory and then sort of not revisit it at the end. Because now I don't know, as a reader, I don't know what you were thinking. And I read a question, and now that question is my question, and that's not answered. And that's frustrating. Then you have two theories which are very common and acceptable as well. Three theories, they're acceptable if they're well justified and well linked together, but four plus is usually too many. Having a good theory, even if it's a single theory, but you have a clear logic for choosing it, you have used it, emphatically in your data collection and data analysis, and you're able to link back to it multiple times in your findings and discussion, is a much better dissertation than one that has multiple theories, but they are neither here nor there. So over-described and underused. Why this theory and not others? How does it shape research? All of these questions are questions that you should ask yourself in choosing your theoretical framework. So this is a stress test that you could do. Sorry. This is a stress test that you could do for your the alignment of your theoretical and conceptual frameworks with your research study. Strong alignment means that your theory is guiding the design of the research. The design is good enough to produce the kind of data that you want. That data is, basically feeding theory and linking back to theory as well. And then the framework is, naturally emerging from that. A weak alignment is because you have added theory just because it looked nice. Window dressing. The methods are procedural. Framework seems forced. It's not seamless. It's not easy. It's not, logical. It's there because you wanted it to be there. And the contribution feels inflated because there is lack of clarity in what you have been trying to do. Okay, thank you very much for being patient with this. And I'm going to stop sharing the slide now. And if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer these. Yes, Sarma, I can see that you have your hand up.
Yeah, I'll talk. It was very good talk. First, let
Thank
me
you.
congratulate you. Brought out the difference between theoretical framework and conceptual framework and how the flow happens and all that. It was very well brought out and very valuable talk. That is first thing. But
Thank you
we
very much.
have
I do apologize for my sore throat that
no
disrupted the
problem.
whole
No
thing a little bit.
problem. Okay, let me just see whether, yeah, so that we can see. Yeah. So now, see, the last point you said about the how many theories. I fully understand that it should be one or two at the most, or maybe three maximum, and it is all. I fully appreciate that. But I want to share one experience. I completed my doctorate in from the GlobalNxt University. I attend the talks to enhance my knowledge. I keep doing that. I want to share my experience, if time permits, for just 2 minutes.
Of course.
Because you see, what my observation is that researchers from different universities talk differently on the same topic. This is a very big issue, and I had a very better experience in my research because I have been my professor, like you are talking. My professor has told me that there should be one or two theories only, and the topic, right from the topic and right from the heading. See, heading should be very compact, and quality should be there, not just some 100 words. Then even 10 words should reflect the quality. I fully appreciate. In fact, I believe in it very strongly. And then research questions. This is one very interesting experience I got. I'm talking about number of theories, number of questions, number of words in the that number, quality versus quantity, what you mentioned. Uh, I was told that it should be one or two questions, especially I was doing a qualitative research, and it should be very deeper analysis. I believed in that. I believe even now, even after my research is over. And because you take one or two questions and go deep into it and find a theory or you find an answer, a solution, and evolve a new theory and all that, that is the right way to do the questions rather than talk some 10 questions and get confused fully in what you are trying to do and create a chaos. You mentioned the word chaos when six theories were there. And I selected two questions. I was very, very happy the about of the research I did. My top, in fact, at the proposal stage, it was very well appreciated, and the heading was very well appreciated. Research questions taken were very well appreciated, and I went through the data collection analysis and submitted the thesis and went to the Viva. Then the drama starts. The external examiner says it is all nonsense. Your title is so short. You have only two questions. You have only two theories. What is that you have done? There should be at least six, seven questions. There should be 20 words in the this description, this, that, and all that. And then there should be so many theories to be interlinked, this, that, and he uh, harassed me like hell. Then I realized that the understanding of how research is to be done itself is not clear to among the different faculties. So anyway, I defended and got through that. But I'm sharing my experience of when you talk about quality and versus quantity, two theories versus six theories, and two questions versus seven questions. All these things, I think there has to be some overall understanding across the research community. This because I am a senior person. I'm a 70-year-old person and I have enormous experience in the industry. So I defended and even questioned his way of talking, but many young students may not be able to do that. That is not the that's what I wanted to share, but I'm taking too much time. I'm sorry for that. I don't have any question, but I wanted to share my experience on this two theories or six theories or two questions or six questions.
Thank you very much, Sama. I couldn't agree more with the point of view that there is a lack of consensus on what makes a good research design across different disciplines, and that is for different reasons. For example, if I'm doing a quantitative study, I could probably test three or four different questions or five different questions and still get away with it. If I'm doing a qualitative study, for example, one research paper I did was on the experiences of motherhood amongst Pakistani women. I had only one research question. That's all. I
Yes,
just asked one question,
that's right.
and that question was enough to satisfy the research aim that I had for that particular study. When I was doing my PhD, I had three theories in it, right? So I used three theories for the theoretical framework, and I developed a policy framework from that. I also subscribe to the idea that research, whatever research you have, the research outputs should be simple enough, and that's part of research ethics as well, by the way. They should be simple enough to be understood by the
Right.
layperson. Not everybody has a background in research methodology.
Yeah, yeah.
But then when you think about the fact that we have different disciplines, the shortest PhD in the world has been, I think it was London School of Economics, but I'm not 100% sure on that. But I think somebody told me that the shortest PhD thesis, not the shortest PhD thesis was in mathematics, which was one page,
Yes, yes, I
right?
know. I'm,
And
I'm
that
aware
serves
of.
a purpose. You
Yes.
don't need to write 10,000 words just to say that, I have achieved that. So based on different disciplines, based on uh, how, again, different researchers have their own ideas as well. And this is where, when you would have seen that when we started, I was talking about researcher bias. We don't really get rid of researcher bias ever. As researchers, we always have some sort of a bias. The best thing I sometimes question, do we really want to get rid of that personality that we bring to every research that we do as individuals? We want that personality. That's the reflexivity. That's the value of me doing a research that would be very different from you doing it, let's say. And the best way I explain it to students is, if a woman does a research study on postpartum depression, her contribution is going to be way more valuable than a man's, because a man has never experienced postpartum depression or can even understand when participants talk about it.
Absolutely.
Um, So I completely understand. At the same time, my own, and I agree with the fact that there should be some sort of a consensus on there. At the same time, I think I stand by my, approach. I'm doing an MSc in consciousness, spirituality, and transpersonal psychology at the moment. So that's my latest interest. The last 4 or 5 years, I've started studying consciousness and spirituality and neuroscience. And some papers I read are so difficult, and I'm like, it would be so easier, if I didn't have to read every sentence 2 or 3 times. But
Mm.
again, that's again different people's way of writing as well. So I think we are in research. This is why a lot of people sort of think that it's difficult because there is no 2 + 2 = 4. 2 + 2 could be 6, 5, 3, depending on who's looking at the equation,
Yeah.
and who's bringing that to it. But yeah, I thank you for sharing that experience. That's
Yeah. Yeah.
really
No,
useful
but
as
I
well.
believe in what you said. That is the reason I talked and tried to concur and appreciate it. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much.
And this is one of the best talks on the difference between conceptual and theoretical framework. This is one topic many people, many researchers don't understand. You brought out very, very well. I think
Oh,
nothing is better than this.
oh, thank you so much. That's really kind of you. Right. Any other questions?
No? Okay, well then we're coming up to about half past the hour, so I think we'll wrap up at that point. Okay, thank you very much, Iram. That was quite interesting.
Thank you, Martin, for moderating this.
Yes, and our talk next month is going to be on the literature review itself. So if you want to be involved in that, please sign in. We will send an invite to everybody. But thank you very much for contributing. Thank you very much for being here. And hopefully we'll see you at one of the other research